My dad looked at the hospital bill, covered his face with trembling hands, and sobbed, "We are finished, daughter. We can never pay this." I hugged him, feeling sorry for him. But exactly 45 minutes later, lawyers walked into the room, and I went into the biggest shock of my life. My father wasn't poor. He was the owner of a secret fortune worth $312 million. While he made me and my daughter Skylar live in poverty for years, he had an empire sitting in his bank account. But my dad forgot one tiny detail. He was no longer in control of that money, and the justice I planned for Skylar was about to become his worst nightmare. What happened next? You won't believe your ears. But first, subscribe to the channel because you do not want to miss this revenge story. My name is Lauren. I am an ER nurse in Boston. I learned two things very well in life: working hard and getting used to having nothing. I grew up with my dad, Frank. My mom left when we were very young, and my dad always told me the same thing. "We have no money, Lauren. We have to make do." I grew up with this sentence. I went to college on a scholarship. I worked overtime. Even when my daughter Skylar was born and I couldn't buy her the simple toys she wanted, my dad was there. "We have to save money, daughter," he would say. Even on the day my credit card was declined while buying Skylar's asthma medication, my dad just lowered his head and said, "I wish I could do something." I believed him. Like a fool, I believed him. Everything changed that Tuesday morning. My dad was rushed to my hospital, to my ER, with severe chest pain. I was terrified. My doctor friends intervened immediately. Thankfully, it wasn't a heart attack, but detailed tests and a hospital stay were required. I got that paper from the billing department. The estimate was $15,000. I walked into my dad's room with that paper. He looked so small in that bed. I handed it to him. When he saw the number, his face went pale. That familiar look of helplessness settled on his face. He put his head in his hands and said that sentence, "Lauren, we are finished. It is impossible for us to find this money. We will be kicked out of the house. We will lose everything." My eyes filled with tears. "Dad, calm down. We will find a way. We will pay in installments." I tried to comfort him. I was thinking I would cut back on Skylar's school expenses. It was my turn to sacrifice again. But fate had a different plan for us. Just as I was holding his hand and crying, there was a sharp knock on the door. Two people, dressed sharply and looking completely out of place in a hospital, walked in. A woman and a young man. The woman took a gold-plated pen out of her bag and looked directly at my dad, not me. "Mr. Mitchell," she said in a cold voice, "I am Harriet Collins from the legal department of Row Dynamics. Your confidentiality agreement has expired. You can't hide anymore." My dad's sick and helpless act vanished instantly. A panic I had never seen before appeared in his eyes. "Harriet, not now, please, my daughter is here, get out," he yelled. His voice was so strong, there was no trace of the sick man from a moment ago. I stood up in shock. "What is going on, Dad? Who are these people?" I asked. The lawyer Harriet turned to me. She had a look of pity on her face. She dropped the file on the bed right next to that unpayable $15,000 bill. "Ms. Mitchell," the lawyer said, "your father, Frank Mitchell, was a co-founder of the tech giant Row Dynamics 20 years ago. The company was sold last month for $4.9 billion. Your father's share, with legal interest, has been deposited into his account." I tried to understand the words. "What share? How much?" I stammered. The young man, Adam Rowe, spoke up. "Exactly $312 million, Ms. Mitchell." The air in the room seemed to be sucked out. I looked at my dad. He had lowered his head. "Dad?" I said, my voice trembling. "The day I couldn't buy Skylar's medicine, did you have $300 million in your account?" My dad started babbling. "Your mom was going to leave me because of this money. I wanted to protect you, Lauren. Wealth corrupts people. I wanted to keep you in a simple life." Protecting me? He had condemned us to misery. But lawyer Harriet stepped in right then and said that miraculous sentence that changed all the balances. "Actually, Mr. Mitchell, there is a misunderstanding. According to the company bylaws, when partners pass the age of 65, management of their assets is transferred to the family under one condition: in case of mental health issues or ethical violations. And the fact that you deceived your daughter for years and hid this money triggers the family betrayal clause in our contract. The lawyer turned to me, her eyes smiling. So, Ms. Mitchell, from this moment on, you are the sole signatory authority for the $312 million. And furthermore, per the company bylaws, the primary heir to this money appears to be the youngest member of the family, your daughter Skylar. My dad's face went white. You can't give that money to that child. She is just a kid, he screamed. In that moment, I wiped my tears. Skylar, my miracle, my daughter, for whom I couldn't even buy a bicycle for years, was now the richest girl in the state. I looked into my dad's eyes and smiled. You are right, Dad, I said. We are finished. But not in the way you meant. You are finished. And right then, I decided to execute the first plan that came to my mind. I had Skylar called to the hospital. But what my dad didn't expect was that Skylar would arrive not just with toys, but with a file that would turn his life into a living hell. Skylar walked into that hospital room like a tiny storm wrapped in a pink jacket, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders, and the moment she saw me, her face lit up with that innocent smile that always broke my heart. She was only 7 years old with messy brown hair and those huge, curious eyes that saw the world as full of wonder, even when we could barely afford to keep the lights on. "Mommy!" she yelled and ran to hug me, completely ignoring the strangers in the room. I held her tight, smelling the strawberry shampoo I bought from the dollar store. And for a second, I forgot about the lawyers, the money, and my father's betrayal. But then I remembered why I called her here, and my grip tightened. Skylar pulled back and looked at my tear-streaked face with concern that no 7-year-old should have to feel. "Mommy, why are you crying? Is Grandpa okay?" she asked softly, glancing at Frank, who was sitting frozen on the hospital bed like a statue. I wiped my eyes and forced a smile. "Grandpa is fine, sweetheart, but Mommy needs to talk to you about something very important," I said, kneeling down to her level. Harriet Collins, the lawyer, stepped forward with a gentleness I didn't expect from someone in a $1,000 suit. "Hello, Skylar. My name is Harriet. I have some papers here that belong to you," she said, holding out a blue folder decorated with little stars, clearly prepared just for a child. Skylar looked at me for permission, and I nodded. She took the folder carefully like it was a treasure map and opened it with both hands. Inside were simplified documents, cartoons explaining what inheritance meant, and a single page with very large numbers printed on it. Skylar squinted at the numbers, her lips moving as she tried to count the zeros. "Mommy, is this real money?" she whispered. Her voice was so small and confused that my heart cracked all over again. "Yes, baby. That money belongs to you now," I said, stroking her hair. "It means you can have anything you want. New toys, a big room, the best doctors for your asthma, anything." Skylar's eyes went wide, but not with greed or excitement like you'd expect from a kid who just became a millionaire. Instead, she looked scared. "But Mommy, you always said we can't afford things. You said we have to be careful. Is Grandpa going to be mad?" she asked, glancing nervously at Frank. And that's when my father made his first terrible mistake. He leaned forward from the bed, his face twisted with desperation, and reached out toward Skylar like he was trying to grab her. "Skylar, sweetheart, listen to Grandpa," he said in that syrupy voice he used when he wanted something. "That money is too much for a little girl. You don't understand what it means. Let Grandpa keep it safe for you, okay? I'll take care of everything just like I always have." The room went silent. Even Adam Rowe, who had been standing quietly in the corner, shifted uncomfortably. Skylar looked at her grandfather with those innocent eyes, and for a moment I thought she might believe him, because she loved him, because children always want to trust their grandparents. But then she did something that made me realize my daughter was far smarter than any of us gave her credit for. She closed the folder carefully, held it against her chest, and took a step back from Frank's reaching hand. "Grandpa," she said in a voice so calm it didn't sound like a 7-year-old at all. "Why didn't you help Mommy when she was crying about the medicine? I remember that day. She called you and you said you had no money, but you did have money, didn't you?" The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Frank's face went from desperate to furious in half a second. "You don't understand, Skylar. I was protecting you from this evil world. Money destroys families," he shouted, his voice echoing off the hospital walls. Skylar flinched, and I immediately stood up and put myself between them. "Don't you dare yell at my daughter," I said, my voice shaking with rage I'd been holding back for 20 years. "You don't get to play the victim anymore, Dad. You chose to let us suffer when you could have helped with one phone call. You watched me work double shifts while you sat on a fortune. You watched Skylar go without while you hoarded your secret like some kind of dragon." Frank pointed a shaking finger at me. "I did it because your mother left me because of money. She said I would change, that I would abandon you both for wealth, and I proved her wrong. I stayed humble. I stayed with you," he screamed. Harriet Collins cleared her throat loudly, cutting through the family drama with professional coldness. "Mr. Mitchell, regardless of your motivations, the legal reality is clear. As of this moment, Lauren Mitchell has full access to the account for Skylar's benefit until she turns 18. You have no legal claim and no decision-making power. Furthermore, if you attempt to contest this arrangement, the company has instructed me to pursue charges of financial fraud and emotional manipulation under Massachusetts family law." My dad's face went from red to purple. "You can't do this to me. I built that company. That money is mine," he roared, trying to get out of the hospital bed. But the heart monitor he was attached to started beeping wildly. A nurse rushed in, alarmed by the commotion in the machines. "Sir, you need to calm down immediately or we'll have to sedate you," the nurse warned, checking his blood pressure, which had clearly skyrocketed. I picked up Skylar and held her close as she wrapped her arms around my neck. "We're leaving," I announced. "Harriet, please send all the documents to my apartment. We'll handle everything through lawyers from now on." As I turned to walk out, carrying my daughter and that blue folder full of our new future, my father's voice cracked behind me. "Lauren, please, don't do this. I'm your father. I love you," he pleaded, and for just a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I stopped at the doorway and looked back at the man who raised me, who taught me to be strong, who also taught me that love sometimes comes with lies that last decades. "You know what, Dad?" I said quietly. "I actually believe you do love me, in your own twisted way. But love isn't enough when it comes wrapped in deceit. You had a choice every single day for 20 years, and every single day you chose to lie. Now it's my turn to choose, and I choose Skylar. I choose the truth, and I choose to never, ever let her grow up thinking she has to suffer because someone decided suffering builds character." Frank's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks as the nurse tried to calm him. "You'll regret this. Money will destroy you just like I knew it would," he shouted after us. But I didn't look back again. I walked out of that hospital room with Skylar in my arms and Harriet Collins following behind us like a well-dressed guardian angel. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope mixed with rage, mixed with absolute determination. In the elevator going down, Skylar whispered in my ear, "Mommy, are we rich now?" I kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby, we are. But more importantly, we're free," I told her. Harriet handed me her business card. "I'll have the first transfer ready by tomorrow morning. I suggest starting with $50,000 for immediate needs, and we'll set up a trust fund for Skylar's education and future. As for your father, he's going to contest this. I can guarantee it. He'll hire lawyers, he'll claim incompetence, he'll drag this through every court he can find." I nodded, already expecting that. "Let him try. I have something he doesn't have anymore," I said firmly. "What's that?" Harriet asked. I looked down at Skylar, who was already falling asleep against my shoulder, exhausted from the emotional chaos. "I have the truth on my side, and I have her. That's more than enough," I said. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew as we stepped out of that hospital into the bright Boston afternoon, was that my father had already made a phone call from his hospital bed before the nurse sedated him. He called someone from his past, someone who owed him a favor, someone who specialized in making problems disappear, and the war for Skylar's fortune was about to get much, much darker than any of us could have imagined. The miracle I thought we'd received was about to be tested in ways that would either destroy us or prove that some battles are worth every scar. The next morning started like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. I sat at our tiny kitchen table in our cramped 2-bedroom apartment that smelled like old coffee and had wallpaper peeling in the corners. And I stared at my phone screen, showing a bank balance I had to read 5 times to believe was real. $50,000 had appeared overnight like magic, except it wasn't magic, it was justice. Finally catching up to 20 years of lies. Skylar was eating cereal across from me, her legs swinging under the chair because they didn't quite reach the floor yet, and she kept glancing at me with this mixture of excitement and nervousness, like she wasn't sure if yesterday had been real or just a very strange dream. "Mommy, can we really buy anything now?" she asked between spoonfuls of the generic brand cereal we'd been eating forever because name brands were too expensive. I reached across and took her small hand. "Yes, sweetheart. We can buy the things we need and some things we want too, but we're going to be smart about it, okay? We're not going to be wasteful or forget where we came from," I told her, and I meant every word because the last thing I wanted was to become like my father, hoarding wealth while people suffered, or worse, spending it all stupidly and ending up right back where we started. Skylar nodded seriously, her face so solemn it almost made me laugh. "Can I get the new inhaler that doesn't taste bad?" she asked, and my heart broke a little because that's what she wanted first, not toys or games, but medicine that didn't make her gag. "Yes, baby. We're getting you the best inhaler money can buy, and we're going to see a specialist about your asthma, and you're never going to wake up struggling to breathe again if I can help it," I promised her. That's when my phone rang, and I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer it anyway. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Detective Sarah Chen from the Boston Police Fraud Division. I need to speak with you about your father, Frank Mitchell. Can you come to the station today?" The voice on the other end said, professional but with an edge of urgency that made my stomach drop. I agreed to come in 2 hours, hung up, and immediately called Harriet Collins, who answered on the first ring like she'd been expecting trouble. "They're moving fast," Harriet said when I told her about the detective. "Your father filed a report last night claiming you coerced him into signing documents while he was medically impaired. He's trying to paint you as an opportunist who took advantage of a sick old man." The rage that shot through me was so intense I had to grip the table edge to steady myself. "He's lying. I didn't make him sign anything. You were there. You saw everything," I said, my voice rising enough that Skylar looked up with worried eyes. Harriet's voice stayed calm. "I know, and I have documentation proving the transfer was legal and initiated by the company, not by you. But your father has hired Marcus Webb, and that's a problem. Webb is known for twisting family disputes into criminal cases. He's expensive and he's ruthless, which means your father is spending serious money to get that fortune back, probably borrowing against future earnings or calling in favors." I felt cold despite the morning sun streaming through our kitchen window. "What do?" I asked. "You go to that police station with me by your side, you tell the absolute truth, and you don't let them intimidate you. And Lauren, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Your father is going to use every weapon he has, including public opinion. Are you ready for that?" Harriet asked. I looked at Skylar, who was watching me with those big eyes that trusted me to protect her from everything bad in the world. I don't have a choice. This is for her, I said. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a gray interrogation room that smelled like stale coffee and fear, with Harriet beside me in her perfect suit, looking completely unbothered, while Detective Chen sat across from us with a folder full of papers and a skeptical expression that made it clear she'd already heard my father's version of events. Ms. Mitchell, your father claims you've been planning this for months. He says you deliberately kept him in financial stress, made him dependent on you emotionally, and then struck when he was at his most vulnerable in the hospital. He's provided emails and text messages showing you asking about his finances repeatedly over the past year, Detective Chen said, sliding printouts across the table. I looked at the messages and felt sick because, yes, I had asked about money, but only because we were drowning in bills and I thought he was struggling too. I asked because I thought we were both poor. I was trying to figure out how to help him, not rob him, I said, my voice shaking. Harriet put a hand on my arm. Detective, those messages prove nothing except that Miss Mitchell was concerned about her father's well-being. What they don't show is any knowledge of the Roe Dynamics fortune, because she genuinely didn't know. The company can provide sealed testimony that Frank Mitchell specifically requested the confidentiality agreement be maintained even after it was no longer legally necessary. He chose to hide his wealth, not from the world, but specifically from his daughter and granddaughter. Detective Chen leaned back, her expression softening slightly. Why would a father do that? What's his motive for keeping his own family in poverty? She asked, and it was a fair question. I took a deep breath. Because my mother left him when I was young, and she told him that money would change him, that he'd become someone who cared more about wealth than family. So he spent 20 years proving her wrong by pretending to be poor, but in the process, he made us actually poor. He traumatized us with financial insecurity while sitting on a fortune. That's not protection, Detective. That's abuse disguised as love, I said, and saying it out loud to a stranger made me realize how insane it all sounded. Detective Chen wrote something in her notebook. I'll need to verify this with the company and review the confidentiality documents. In the meantime, Ms. Mitchell, I have to advise you not to make any large purchases or transfers that could be seen as dissipating assets. Your father's lawyer is pushing for a temporary freeze on the accounts pending a full investigation, she said. Harriet stood up sharply. Absolutely not. That money is legally designated for the child's welfare under corporate bylaws that supersede any family dispute. If you freeze those accounts, you're denying a 7-year-old medical care and basic necessities. I will have an injunction filed within the hour, she said with such authority that even the detective looked impressed. We left the police station an hour later, with no arrests but no resolution either, and I felt like I was walking through quicksand where every step forward pulled me deeper into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Harriet walked me to my beat-up Honda in the parking lot and handed me another business card, this one for a private investigator. Your father is building a narrative, so we need to build ours. This investigator specializes in financial forensics. I want him to dig into your father's life for the past 20 years and find proof of the intentional deception. Bank statements showing he had access to millions while you were on food stamps, property records, travel, anything that proves he was living comfortably while watching you suffer, Harriet explained. I took the card with shaking hands. This feels wrong, like I'm attacking my own father, I admitted. Harriet's expression softened for the first time since I'd met her. Lauren, I've been doing family law for 15 years, and I've seen every kind of manipulation there is. What your father did to you is called financial abuse, and it's just as damaging as any other kind. You're not attacking him by defending yourself and your daughter. You're setting boundaries that should have existed decades ago, she said. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. That afternoon, I picked Skylar up from school and took her to the pediatric pulmonologist that our crappy insurance would never have covered before. and watching my daughter breathe easier after getting the right medication was the first moment of pure happiness I'd felt since this whole disaster started. But when we got home, there was an envelope taped to our apartment door, and inside was a handwritten letter from my father that made my blood run cold. "Lauren, I know you think you're doing the right thing, but you're being manipulated by corporate lawyers who want to destroy me. That money will corrupt you and Skylar just like it corrupted your mother. I'm trying to save you from yourself. If you don't return control of the accounts to me by Friday, I will be forced to take measures you won't like. This is your last warning. Love, Dad." The threat was clear, even though the words were dressed up as concern, and I realized my father wasn't just going to fight me in court, he was going to fight dirty. I called Harriet immediately and read her the letter. "Save that, it's evidence of intimidation. Lauren, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is there anything in your past, anything at all, that your father could use against you? Any mistakes, any incidents, anything that could make you look unfit as a parent?" Harriet asked. My mind raced through years of struggling and surviving. I had some credit card debt that went to collections a few years ago. I was late on rent twice and almost got evicted. There was one time when Skylar was 4, and I left her with a neighbor while I worked a double shift, and the neighbor called CPS because she thought I was neglecting her, but it was investigated and dismissed. "Is that enough?" I asked, my voice rising with panic. Harriet was quiet for a long moment. "It's enough for a good lawyer to build a case around if they're creative. Webb is going to paint you as financially irresponsible, as someone who can't be trusted with wealth, who abandoned her child for work. None of it will be true, but it will be enough to make a judge question things," she said. I sank onto my couch, feeling like the walls were closing in. "So what do I do? Just give up? Let him win?" I asked. "No, you fight harder than you've ever fought for anything, and you remember why you're doing this?" Harriet said firmly. That night after I put Skylar to bed, I sat alone in the dark living room of our apartment and made a decision that would change everything. If my father wanted war, I would give him war, but I wouldn't fight it his way with lawyers and courts that moved at a glacial pace while my daughter's future hung in the balance. I would fight it by exposing him, by showing the world exactly who Frank Mitchell really was, behind his mask of humble poverty. I opened my laptop and started typing. I wrote about growing up without birthday parties because we couldn't afford them while my father had millions. I wrote about the time I begged him for $300 to fix my car so I could get to work, and he said no, claiming he was broke, while he had $300 million sitting in an account. I wrote about Skylar's asthma attacks and the cheap inhaler that barely worked, and the nights I stayed awake terrified she'd stop breathing because I couldn't afford better care. I wrote everything, every painful memory, every lie, every moment of suffering that could have been prevented with one honest conversation, and then I posted it on social media with a simple title, "My Father's $312 million Lie." By morning, it had been shared 10,000 times. By afternoon, the local news had picked it up. By evening, I had reporters camped outside my apartment building, and my phone was ringing nonstop with interview requests. Harriet called me absolutely furious. "What did you do? You just gave Webb ammunition to claim you're trying to destroy your father's reputation out of spite. You played right into his hands," she yelled. But I didn't care anymore. Good. Let them come. I'm done being quiet. I'm done protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. If he wants to drag me through the mud, I'll drag him right along with me, except my mud is the truth and his is just more lies, I said. And that's when things got really interesting, because someone else read my story, someone I never expected, someone who had their own reasons to hate Frank Mitchell and their own secrets about the fortune he'd been hiding. The call came at 7 in the morning, 3 days after my post went viral, and the voice on the other end was female, older, shaking with emotion I couldn't quite identify as anger or grief, or maybe both tangled together. "Is this Lauren Mitchell? Frank Mitchell's daughter?" the woman asked. I was exhausted from dealing with reporters and lawyers and the constant anxiety of waiting for my father's next move. So I almost hung up thinking it was another journalist, but something in her tone made me pause. "Yes, this is Lauren." "Who is this?" I asked cautiously. "My name is Patricia Keene. I was your father's business partner at Row Dynamics, the one he never mentions, the one who got erased from the company history. I read your story, and I think you need to know the truth about where that $312 million actually came from," she said, and suddenly I was wide awake. We met at a coffee shop in Cambridge an hour later, and Patricia Keene turned out to be a woman in her early 60s, with gray hair cut short and sharp eyes that looked like they'd seen too much betrayal to ever be surprised again. She brought a briefcase stuffed with old documents, yellowed papers, and photographs that showed a younger version of my father standing next to her in front of a building with a Row Dynamics banner. I co-founded that company with Frank and Adam Rowe's father, Richard Rowe, back in 1998. We were equal partners, each of us with a third of the shares. We built something incredible together, something that changed the tech industry. But in 2003, Frank did something that destroyed our partnership and nearly destroyed me, Patricia said, her hands trembling slightly as she opened a folder. She showed me documents that proved she'd been forced out of the company through a hostile internal vote orchestrated by my father and Richard Rowe, who claimed she was mismanaging funds when in reality she'd discovered they were inflating their contracts with government agencies to boost short-term profits. I threatened to go public with the fraud, so your father and Richard made me disappear instead. They bought out my shares for pennies on the dollar, threatened me with legal action if I ever spoke about it, and rewrote the company history to erase my name completely. That fortune your father has? A third of it should have been mine, and would have been if he hadn't stolen it through lies and manipulation, Patricia explained, and I could see the pain of 20 years of injustice written across her face. I felt sick. "So my father isn't just a liar, he's a thief?" I asked. Patricia nodded. "A very successful one. But Lauren, I didn't ask you here just to complain about the past. I asked you here because I think we can help each other. Your father is trying to take that money away from you and your daughter by claiming you're unfit and manipulative, right? Well, I have documentation proving he's done this before, proving he has a pattern of financial abuse and deception that goes back decades. If you let me testify in your case, I can destroy his credibility completely," she offered. I should have felt grateful, but instead I felt suspicious because nobody offers help that powerful without wanting something in return. "What do you get out of this?" I asked bluntly. Patricia smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting 20 years for revenge. "I get to watch Frank Mitchell finally face consequences for what he did to me. And maybe, just maybe, if your lawyers are as good as you say, we can reopen my case and get me the compensation I should have received. But honestly, even if I don't get a penny, watching him lose everything to the daughter he lied to for 20 years will be payment enough," she said. I brought Patricia's information to Harriet that afternoon, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I saw my lawyer actually smile. "This is exactly what we need. Patricia's testimony establishes a pattern of behavior that makes your father's claims look absurd. Webb won't be able to paint you as the manipulator when we can prove Frank has been manipulating people out of their money and their rights for decades," Harriet said, already making notes. But Marcus Webb, my father's lawyer, wasn't stupid and he wasn't slow. 2 days before our scheduled court hearing to determine temporary custody of the accounts, Webb filed a motion that made my hands shake with rage when I read it. He was petitioning the court to grant my father emergency visitation with Skylar, claiming I was alienating her from her grandfather and using the money dispute to poison their relationship. "He wants access to my daughter? After everything he's done?" I said to Harriet over the phone, barely able to keep my voice steady. "It's a manipulation tactic. If he can get in front of Skylar, he'll try to convince her that you're the bad guy, that you're keeping them apart, that she should ask you to give the money back to Grandpa. He's going to use a 7-year-old child as a weapon in a financial war, which tells you everything you need to know about his character," Harriet explained. "I made a decision right then that I knew was risky, but felt absolutely necessary." "I want Skylar to testify," I said. Harriet went silent on the other end. "Lauren, she's 7 years old. Putting her on the stand is traumatic, and Webb will destroy her credibility by making her look like a coached child repeating what Mommy told her to say," Harriet warned. "I know, but Skylar is smarter than anyone gives her credit for, and she deserves to have a voice in this. My father spent years lying to her just like he lied to me. If anyone has the right to tell a judge what kind of grandfather he really is, it's her," I insisted. Harriet eventually agreed, but only if we had Skylar evaluated by a child psychologist first to make sure she could handle the pressure and to document that she wasn't being coached. The evaluation took place over 3 sessions, and the psychologist, Dr. Raymond Walsh, was a kind older man who specialized in children in family court cases. He played games with Skylar, asked her gentle questions, and let her draw pictures about her feelings. After the 3rd session, Dr. Walsh called me into his office alone. "Ms. Mitchell, your daughter is remarkably emotionally intelligent for her age. She understands far more about this situation than you might think, and she has very clear feelings about it. She's not traumatized by the court case itself, but she is hurt and confused by her grandfather's behavior. In my professional opinion, allowing her to speak briefly to the judge in chambers, not in open court, would be therapeutic for her and potentially very impactful for your case," he said. I felt tears sting my eyes. "What did she say about her grandfather?" I asked. Dr. Walsh pulled out one of Skylar's drawings, and it showed 3 stick figures, one tall labeled Mommy, one small labeled Me, and one separate on the other side of the page labeled Grandpa, with a big wall drawn between them. She said, "Grandpa built a wall made of secrets, and now he's mad that we found the door," Dr. Walsh quoted, and I realized my 7-year-old had just summarized this entire disaster better than any lawyer could. The court hearing arrived on a gray Thursday morning that felt heavy with the weight of everything that was about to change. I dressed Skylar in her nicest dress, the one we'd bought for school pictures last year, and I held her hand as we walked into the courthouse with Harriet on one side and Patricia Keene on the other, like a small army of women my father had underestimated. My father was already there with Marcus Webb, and seeing him in person for the first time since the hospital made my chest tight with complicated emotions I didn't have time to process. He looked older somehow, smaller, and when his eyes met mine, there was something that might have been regret but looked more like desperation. The hearing was in front of Judge Maria Santos, a woman in her 50s known for being fair but tough, and as we all took our seats, I felt Skylar squeeze my hand 3 times, our secret code for I love you, and I squeezed back 4 times, our code for I love you more. Marcus Webb started strong, painting me as an opportunistic daughter who had manipulated a sick elderly man during a vulnerable moment, who had a history of financial instability and poor judgment, who was now trying to alienate a grandfather from his beloved granddaughter out of pure greed. Your Honor, Ms. Mitchell's social media post was nothing more than a calculated attack designed to humiliate my client and prejudice any court proceedings. She's turned this private family matter into a public circus, and all the while she's spending money that rightfully belongs to Mr. Frank Mitchell, money he earned through decades of hard work and sacrifice, Webb argued, his voice full of righteous indignation that would have been convincing if I didn't know the truth. Then it was Harriet's turn, and she stood up with the calm confidence of someone holding all the winning cards. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce testimony from Patricia Keene, former co-founder of Row Dynamics, whose existence Mr. Mitchell has denied for 20 years. Ms. Keene will demonstrate that Mr. Mitchell has a documented pattern of financial manipulation, deception, and abuse that makes his current claims of victimhood not only false, but insulting to this court's intelligence, Harriet said. Patricia took the stand and told her story with the clarity of someone who'd been rehearsing it in her head for 2 decades, showing documents, emails, and evidence that made Webb's objections look weaker and weaker. She explained how my father had stolen her portion of the company, how he'd threatened and intimidated her into silence, how he'd rewritten history to make himself look like the sole genius behind Row Dynamics, when in reality he'd been willing to commit fraud and destroy partnerships to increase his own wealth. Judge Santos listened with an increasingly stern expression, making notes and occasionally asking pointed questions that made my father shift uncomfortably in his seat. Then Harriet called me to the stand, and I told my story without drama or exaggeration, just the plain facts of growing up poor while my father hoarded millions, of watching my daughter suffer with inadequate medical care while he had the means to provide the best, of the lies that stretched across my entire lifetime. Ms. Mitchell, why do you think your father did this? What was his motive? Judge Santos asked me directly. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and tried to find an answer that made sense. I think he was so afraid of losing me the way he lost my mother that he controlled me through poverty instead. He thought if I never knew about the money, I'd never leave, I'd never change, I'd stay dependent on him forever. But what he didn't understand is that love based on lies isn't love at all. It's just another form of prison, I said. Webb cross-examined me aggressively, trying to trip me up, trying to make me look angry or vengeful or unstable. But I'd lived through too much real hardship to be intimidated by a lawyer's word games. Every question he asked, I answered with calm truth, and I could see the frustration building in his face as he realized I wasn't going to break. Then came the moment that changed everything. Judge Santos announced she wanted to speak with Skylar in chambers, alone except for a court reporter. No lawyers, no parents, just the judge and my daughter having a private conversation. I watched Skylar walk through that big wooden door holding Dr. Walsh's hand, and I felt like my heart was walking out of my chest with her. We waited in the courtroom in absolute silence for 25 minutes that felt like 25 years. And when the door finally opened again and Skylar came out, she walked straight to me and climbed into my lap like she was 6 years younger, and I knew something significant had happened in that room. Judge Santos returned to the bench, and her expression was unreadable professional stone. I've heard testimony from all parties, reviewed the documentation provided, and most importantly, I've spoken with the child at the center of this dispute. I'm ready to make my ruling, she announced, and the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Mr. Mitchell, I find your behavior over the past 20 years to be deeply troubling. You deliberately withheld financial resources from your daughter and granddaughter while possessing substantial wealth. You created a false narrative of poverty that caused genuine suffering, and your recent actions suggest this pattern of manipulation and control continues. The court finds no merit in your claims that Ms. Lauren Mitchell coerced or manipulated you. The evidence clearly shows the transfer of account authority was initiated by Row Dynamics, per their corporate bylaws, not by Ms. Mitchell, Judge Santos said, and I felt my father deflate beside his lawyer, like someone had punctured his last hope. But the judge wasn't finished. However, I am also concerned about the public nature of this dispute and the potential impact on the minor child. Ms. Mitchell, while I understand your frustration and anger, airing family grievances on social media is not appropriate when a child is involved, and you will refrain from any further public statements about this case. Do you understand? She said, looking directly at me. I nodded quickly. Yes, Your Honor. I understand, I said, grateful that was the worst reprimand I was getting. As for the financial accounts, I am granting full signatory authority to Ms. Lauren Mitchell, with the requirement that she establish a proper trust fund for Skylar Mitchell, administered by a neutral third-party financial advisor approved by this court. Mr. Mitchell will have no access to these funds and no decision-making authority. Furthermore, I am ordering a formal investigation into the allegations raised by Ms. Patricia Keene regarding potential fraud in the original Row Dynamics partnership. And, Mr. Mitchell, you should be aware that criminal charges may be forthcoming depending on what that investigation uncovers, Judge Santos declared, and I heard my father make a sound like a wounded animal. Webb jumped up. Your Honor, this is outrageous. You're destroying my client based on uncorroborated allegations from a disgruntled former partner, he objected. Judge Santos fixed him with a look that could freeze fire. Counselor, I'm destroying nothing. I'm simply allowing the truth to finally come to light after being buried for 20 years. Your client made his choices, and now he gets to live with the consequences. Sit down, she ordered, and Webb sat. But then came the part I wasn't expecting, the part that made my stomach drop. As for visitation, Mr. Mitchell, you have requested supervised visitation with your granddaughter, Skylar. Based on my conversation with the child, I am denying that request at this time. Skylar expressed to me that she feels unsafe around you, not physically but emotionally. She said, and I quote, "Grandpa's love comes with too many secrets, and I don't want secrets anymore." That's a remarkably mature statement from a 7-year-old, and I'm inclined to respect her wishes. If at some point in the future Skylar decides she wants to see you, that will be her choice to make, but it will not be forced upon her by this court, Judge Santos said. I looked at my father and saw him break completely, tears streaming down his face, his hands shaking, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the love I used to have for him, the little girl who thought her daddy hung the moon. But then I remembered all the nights I cried over bills I couldn't pay, all the times Skylar asked for things I couldn't give her, all the lies that had built a wall between who my father pretended to be and who he actually was, and that flicker went out. The hearing ended, paperwork was signed, and suddenly I was walking out of that courthouse with my daughter, with Patricia Keene hugging me and promising to stay in touch, with Harriet already on her phone arranging the trust fund and the financial advisor, and with the weight of 20 years of lies finally lifted off my shoulders. But freedom is never as simple as one court ruling, and my father's final act of manipulation was still waiting for us, hiding in plain sight, about to reveal itself in a way that would test everything I thought I knew about justice and revenge and mercy. We went home that afternoon and I made Skylar her favorite dinner, mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs, even though we could now afford steak or lobster or whatever we wanted. She sat at our kitchen table swinging her legs and smiling, and I realized that money hadn't changed the simple things that made her happy, which meant maybe I'd done something right in raising her, despite all the hardship. "Mommy, what did you tell the judge?" I asked her gently, curious about what had happened in those chambers. Skylar put down her fork and looked at me with those wise eyes that sometimes seemed too old for her face. I told her the truth. I told her that Grandpa used to make me happy, but now he makes me sad because he lied to you and that made you cry. I told her that I love Grandpa, but I don't trust him anymore. And love, without trust, is like a house without a roof. It can't protect you when the storm comes, she said matter-of-factly, like she was reciting something obvious. I stared at my daughter and wondered when exactly she'd become so wise, and whether that wisdom was a gift or just another scar from growing up too fast in a world that demanded too much from children. "That's very smart, baby. Where did you learn that?" I asked. Skylar shrugged. "I just know it. Like how I know that you're sad about Grandpa even though you won. You still love him, don't you, Mommy?" she asked, and I realized I couldn't lie to her, not after everything we'd been through fighting against lies. "Yes, sweetheart, I do still love him, which is why this hurts so much. It's hard when someone you love disappoints you," I admitted. Skylar nodded like she understood completely. Maybe someday he'll say sorry for real and mean it, and then you can love him again without it hurting, she said hopefully. I kissed her forehead. Maybe, baby. Maybe, I said, but I didn't believe it. That night, after Skylar went to bed, I sat alone with a glass of wine I'd bought without checking the price tag, a small luxury that still felt strange and slightly wrong, and I thought about my father and wondered what he was doing right now, whether he was angry or sad or already plotting his next move. I got my answer at 2 a.m. when my phone rang with a call from a number I recognized as the hospital. Ms. Mitchell, this is Boston Medical Center. Your father, Frank Mitchell, was brought in an hour ago. He's had a major heart attack. You're listed as his emergency contact. You should come immediately, the nurse said, and my wine glass nearly slipped from my hand. I called Harriet even though it was the middle of the night because I didn't trust myself to go to that hospital alone. Didn't trust that this wasn't some kind of manipulation or trap. Lauren, it could be real, or it could be your father's attempt to gain sympathy and force you into a reconciliation. Either way, you should go, but document everything. If he tries to discuss the case or the money, you walk away immediately, Harriet advised, her voice thick with sleep but still sharp. I got a neighbor to watch Skylar and drove to the hospital in the dark, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, memories flooding back of the last time I'd rushed to see my father in a hospital bed, how that had been the beginning of this entire nightmare. When I walked into the cardiac ICU, I found my father unconscious, hooked up to machines that beeped and hissed, and Marcus Webb sitting in the chair beside the bed like a vulture waiting for death. "What are you doing here?" I asked coldly. Webb stood up and had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Your father called me before the paramedics arrived. He wanted me to give you this if something happened to him," Webb said, holding out an envelope with my name written in my father's shaky handwriting. I took it, but didn't open it. "Is this real, or is this another one of his schemes?" I asked bluntly. Webb actually looked offended. "Ms. Mitchell, I may be your adversary in court, but I'm not a monster. Your father genuinely had a massive coronary event. Whether it was brought on by stress from the court case or would have happened anyway, we'll never know, but it's very serious. The doctors aren't sure he'll make it through the night," he said quietly. I sat down heavily in the chair on the other side of my father's bed and looked at the man who'd shaped my entire life through his presence and his lies, and I felt a complicated mess of emotions I couldn't untangle into anything coherent. "You can go. I'll stay with him," I told Webb. He looked surprised. "After everything he's done, you're still going to sit vigil?" he asked. I met his eyes. "He's still my father. That's the difference between him and me. I don't abandon people when things get hard, even when they deserve it," I said. Webb left, and I was alone with my unconscious father and that unopened envelope and the sound of machines keeping him alive. I finally opened the letter, and inside was a single page written in my father's handwriting, shaky and rushed like he'd written it in a panic. "Lauren, if you're reading this, I'm either dead or close to it. I need you to know that everything I did because I was terrified. Terrified of losing you like I lost your mother. Terrified that money would destroy our relationship. Terrified that you'd realize I wasn't worth loving once you knew the truth. I was wrong about everything. I see that now. The money didn't destroy us. My lies did. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I loved you and Skylar more than I loved that fortune. I just didn't know how to show it without destroying everything in the process. The account numbers and passwords are in my desk at home. Take it all. Give Skylar the life I should have given you. And maybe, if there's any kindness left in your heart, tell her that her grandfather loved her, even though he was too broken to love her the right way. I'm sorry, Lauren, for all of it. Dad." I read that letter 3 times sitting in the cold fluorescent light of the ICU while my father's heart monitor beeped its irregular rhythm, and I felt something crack open inside my chest that I'd been holding closed for weeks, maybe for years, maybe for my entire life. Anger and grief and love and resentment all tangled together into something that felt too big for my body to contain, and I started crying, really crying. The kind of sobbing that comes from somewhere deep and primal that you can't control or stop. A nurse came in to check on my father and saw me falling apart, and she put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Would you like me to call someone for you, honey?" she asked kindly. I shook my head and wiped my face with my sleeve like a child. "No, I'm okay. I'm just processing a lot," I managed to say. The nurse smiled sadly. "Family stuff is always the hardest. The people we love the most have the power to hurt us the deepest," she said with the wisdom of someone who'd seen 1,000 family dramas play out in hospital rooms. She left me alone, again, and I sat there holding my father's hand, this hand that had held mine when I was learning to walk, that had wiped my tears when I was sad, that had also signed documents to erase Patricia Keene from history, and had refused me $300 when I desperately needed it while he had millions. How could one person contain so much love and so much selfishness at the same time? I stayed with him through the night, dozing in the uncomfortable chair, waking every time the monitors changed their rhythm, and somewhere around dawn, his eyes finally opened. He looked at me with confusion at first, like he couldn't believe I was there, and then his eyes filled with tears. "Lauren," he whispered, his voice rough and weak, "you stayed." "Of course I stayed, Dad. What did you think, that I'd let you die alone out of spite?" I said, and my voice came out harsher than I meant it to. He tried to shake his head, but the movement seemed to hurt. "I wouldn't have blamed you. After everything I put you through, you'd have every right to walk away," he said. I squeezed his hand. "That's the difference between us, Dad. You thought love was something you could control and manipulate and hide behind walls of secrets. I know love is something you do even when it's hard, even when the person doesn't deserve it. I'm not here because you earned it. I'm here because you're my father, and because despite everything, I still love you, even though I really wish I didn't," I told him. Fresh tears ran down his face. "I read your letter," I continued, "and I want you to know that I understand you were scared. I understand your mother leaving traumatized you. But Dad, you can't let one person's mistakes in the past destroy everyone's future. You spent 20 years trying to prove my mom wrong about money corrupting you, and in the process you became exactly what she feared. Someone who valued control over connection, someone who hurt the people he claimed to protect," I said. My father closed his eyes. "I know. I've known for years, but I was too proud and too afraid to admit it. And now I've lost everything that mattered. I've lost you, I've lost Skylar, and I've probably lost my freedom if that investigation goes forward," he said, his voice breaking. I thought about that, about justice and punishment, and whether my father had suffered enough or whether he deserved everything that was coming to him. "The investigation is going forward, Dad. Patricia deserves to have her name cleared and to get what was stolen from her." "But I'll make you a deal," I offered. He opened his eyes and looked at me with desperate hope. "What deal?" he asked. "You cooperate fully with the investigation. You admit what you did to Patricia and help her get justice. You apologize to her publicly the same way you made me suffer publicly. And in exchange, I'll talk to the prosecutor about your age and your health and recommend leniency. I can't promise anything, but I have some influence now whether you like it or not, and I'll use it to try to keep you out of prison if you do the right thing for once in your life," I said. My father stared at me like I'd just offered him salvation he didn't deserve, which I suppose I had. "Why would you do that for me after everything?" he whispered. I thought about Skylar's words, about love without trust being a house without a roof, unable to protect anyone when the storm came. "Because you're right about one thing, Dad. Money didn't destroy our family. Secrets and lies did. And I'm not going to perpetuate that cycle by hiding my mercy behind walls of justified anger. I'm going to be honest about everything, including the fact that I still love you enough to want you to have a chance at redemption, even if you don't fully deserve it, I explained. My father sobbed then, really sobbed, his whole body shaking with the kind of grief that comes from finally facing what you've done and who you've become. I don't deserve you, Lauren. I never did, he choked out. No, you didn't. But maybe that's the point of grace, Dad. It's not about deserving it. It's about choosing to give it anyway, I said. We stayed like that for a while, father and daughter holding hands in a hospital room, while machines beeped and morning light started filtering through the windows. And something began to shift between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the first fragile possibility of it somewhere down a long road we'd both have to walk. Over the next few weeks, my father recovered slowly from his heart attack, and true to his word, he cooperated with the investigation into what happened with Patricia Keene. He gave depositions, he handed over documents he'd kept hidden, he admitted to fraud and manipulation and all the ugly things he'd done to build his fortune. Patricia got her name restored in the company history, got a settlement of $40 million, which wasn't everything she'd lost, but was enough for her to finally feel vindicated, and she thanked me with tears in her eyes for making it possible. Your father doesn't deserve you, she told me, echoing his own words. Maybe not, but I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing it because it's right, I replied. The prosecutor, seeing my father's cooperation and his poor health, agreed to a plea deal that involved massive fines, restitution, and 5 years of probation instead of prison time. Marcus Webb, who'd fought so hard against me in court, actually called to thank me for showing mercy his client hadn't earned. You're a better person than most people I meet in this job, Ms. Mitchell. Your father is lucky to have you, even if he spent 20 years not realizing it, Webb said. Meanwhile, Skylar's trust fund was established with the help of a financial advisor named Martin Chen, who specialized in managing wealth for families who'd suddenly come into money and needed guidance on how not to destroy themselves with it. The most important thing is teaching Skylar the value of money while giving her access to resources that can change her life. It's a balance, and we'll work on it together, Martin explained during our first meeting. I made decisions carefully, thoughtfully. I paid off all my debts first, that crushing credit card balance that had haunted me for years, gone in an instant. I bought us a modest house, nothing crazy, just a 3-bedroom in a good school district with a backyard where Skylar could play safely. I set up a college fund that would pay for any school she wanted to attend. I established a charitable foundation in Skylar's name that would help other single mothers struggling with medical bills for their kids, turning our pain into purpose. And I kept working as an ER nurse because that work gave me meaning that money never could, and because I wanted Skylar to see that wealth didn't mean you stopped contributing to the world, it meant you had more power to help. Skylar adjusted to our new reality with the resilience that kids somehow always manage. She got the best asthma care available. Her breathing improved dramatically, and watching her run and play without struggling for air was worth more than all $312 million combined. She made new friends at her new school. She took art classes she'd always wanted to try, and she started violin lessons because she'd always been fascinated by the instrument, but we'd never been able to afford it. But she also never forgot where she came from, and sometimes I'd catch her looking at toys in stores with this calculating expression, doing mental math to figure out if something was worth the price, habits formed from years of scarcity that wouldn't disappear overnight. "Mommy, can I buy this?" She'd ask about a $15 doll, even though she had access to millions. "Do you really want it, or do you just like looking at it?" I'd ask back. She'd think carefully. "I just like looking at it. I don't need it," she'd decide, and we'd walk away, and I'd feel proud of her restraint even as my heart broke a little that she'd learned it the hard way. 6 months after the court case, on a Saturday afternoon in October when the leaves were turning gold and red outside our new house, My father called and asked if he could visit. I'd seen him a few times since he'd gotten out of the hospital, brief meetings in neutral locations like coffee shops, conversations that stayed surface level and safe, both of us dancing around the damage between us. But this time, he wanted to come to our home, wanted to see where Skylar and I were building our new life, and I hesitated before saying yes. Skylar overheard the conversation and surprised me by saying, "It's okay, Mommy. I want to see Grandpa. Not forever, just for today." So my father came to our house, and he stood on the porch looking older and smaller than I remembered, carrying a wrapped present and wearing an expression of such nervous hope that I almost felt sorry for him again. Skylar opened the door before I could, and she looked up at her grandfather with those serious eyes that saw too much. "Hi, Grandpa," she said cautiously. "Hi, Skylar. I brought you something," he said, holding out the present. She took it but didn't open it immediately. "Is it a secret present or a real present?" she asked, and I realized she was testing him, checking to see if he'd learned anything. My father knelt down, wincing because his knees weren't what they used to be, and looked his granddaughter in the eye. "It's a real present with no secrets attached, I promise. And Skylar, I need to tell you something important. I'm sorry for lying to you and your mommy. I'm sorry for making you grow up thinking you couldn't have things when you could have. I'm sorry for being a grandfather who loved you but loved you wrong. And I understand if you can't forgive me, but I hope maybe someday you'll let me try to do better," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. Skylar studied him for a long moment, and I held my breath, waiting to see what she'd decide. Then she opened the present carefully, and inside was a violin, a beautiful child-sized instrument that must have cost thousands of dollars. "I heard you were learning violin. I wanted you to have a good one," my father said quietly. Skylar touched the violin gently, then looked back at him. "Thank you, Grandpa. But you know what I want more than a violin?" she asked. "What?" he said. "I want you to come to my recital next month and watch me play the one I already have. Because the violin is nice, but having you there and being proud of me for real, not pretend proud, that would be better," she said. And just like that, my 7-year-old daughter taught my father the lesson he'd spent 20 years refusing to learn. That presence matters more than presents. That truth matters more than treasure. And that love has to be given freely, or it isn't really love at all. My father started crying right there on our porch, and Skylar hugged him awkwardly because she was still a kid who didn't quite know how to handle adult emotions, and I watched them and felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe easy. We invited him in, and we had lunch together, just the three of us sitting at our new kitchen table that was bigger and nicer than the old one, but still held the same macaroni and cheese because some things didn't need to change just because you had money. My father told Skylar stories about when I was little, real stories this time, without the edited version where he pretended to be poor, and Skylar listened with fascination because she was finally getting to know the real person her grandfather was instead of the character he'd played. And when he left that evening, promising to come to the recital and meaning it this time, I stood on the porch and watched him walk to his car, and I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment of decision. It was a process, a choice you made over and over again every time the hurt tried to come back. I was choosing it, slowly and imperfectly, not because my father had earned it completely, but because holding on to anger was heavier than learning to let it go piece by piece. That night, after Skylar went to bed, I sat in our living room in our new house that still smelled like fresh paint and new furniture, and I thought about everything that had happened. Since that day, my father looked at a $15,000 hospital bill and said, "We're finished." He'd been right in a way. We were finished with the old life built on lies, but what he hadn't understood was that sometimes things have to end completely before they can begin again as something true. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Keene. Saw your father's interview where he admitted what he did to me. Thank you for making him face the truth. You gave me something more valuable than money. You gave me vindication. How's Skylar?" I smiled and texted back, "She's good, she's really good, and thank you for being brave enough to come forward. You helped us more than you know." Another text came in, this one from Harriet Collins. "Just finished setting up the charitable foundation paperwork. You're officially ready to start helping other families. I'm proud of you, Lauren. You took a nightmare situation and turned it into something meaningful." I looked around at the life we'd built in the aftermath of betrayal and secrets finally coming to light, and I realized that the real miracle wasn't the money, wasn't the fortune that appeared like magic in an account, wasn't the material comfort we now enjoyed after years of struggle. The real miracle was Skylar, my daughter who'd grown up with nothing but somehow learned everything that mattered, who understood that love was more important than wealth and truth was more important than comfort. The real miracle was that she'd survived our poverty without becoming bitter, that she'd received sudden wealth without becoming spoiled, that she'd watched her grandfather's lies explode and her mother's pain overflow, and somehow remained kind and wise and hopeful about people's ability to change. I walked into her room and watched her sleep, her chest rising and falling easily with the help of the medication we could finally afford, her face peaceful and innocent, and I made her a silent promise. I promised that I would never lie to her the way my father lied to me, that I would never use money as a weapon or a tool of control, that I would teach her that wealth was a responsibility, not a reward, and that the only fortune worth having was the one you shared with others. I promised that I would show her how to be generous without being wasteful, how to be comfortable without being complacent, how to remember where you came from without being trapped by it. And I promised that I would let her make her own choices about her grandfather, about forgiveness, about how much room to give people who've hurt you when they're trying to do better. The next morning, Sunday breakfast became the first tradition of our new life. I made pancakes, real ones from scratch, because we had time now and good ingredients, and Skylar helped me mix the batter with her tongue sticking out in concentration the way she always did when she was focused. "Mommy, are we rich now?" she asked, while flipping a pancake that was slightly lopsided but perfect anyway. It was a question she'd asked before, but this time felt different, more contemplative, like she was trying to understand what the word really meant. "We have a lot of money now, yes. Does that feel different to you?" I asked carefully. Skylar thought about it, her face serious. "Kind of. I like that you're not sad about bills anymore, and I like that my lungs don't hurt, but I don't feel different inside. I'm still me, just with better medicine and a bigger room," she said. I hugged her from behind while she stood on her step stool at the stove. "That's exactly right, baby. Money changes what you can do, but it doesn't change who you are unless you let it. The important thing is to stay yourself and remember that having money means you can help other people who need it," I explained. "Like the foundation thing? The one for other kids with asthma who can't afford medicine?" she asked. "Exactly like that. We're going to help a lot of families so they don't have to struggle the way we did," I confirmed. Skylar smiled, pleased with this idea. "Good. Because it's not fair that some kids can't breathe just because they're poor. Breathing should be free for everyone," she said with the simple moral clarity that children have before the world teaches them to accept injustice as normal. We ate our pancakes and talked about her upcoming violin recital, and she mentioned nervously that she hoped she wouldn't mess up in front of everyone. "And Grandpa's coming, right?" "He promised," she said, and I heard the uncertainty in her voice, the fear that promises from him might still be empty. "He promised, and I believe he means it this time. But sweetie, if he doesn't come, that's about him and his problems, not about you or your worth. You understand that, right?" I said. Skylar nodded slowly. "I understand. It just hurts less when people show up," she said quietly. And I realized my daughter had learned the hardest lesson of all, that love without follow-through was just pretty words that left you disappointed. The recital came 2 weeks later, held in the school auditorium with that specific smell of old wood and nervous children that every school performance has. Skylar was 7th in the lineup, wearing a navy blue dress we'd picked out together, her violin tucked under her arm, her hair pulled back in a braid that had taken me 3 tries to get right. I sat in the 3rd row, my phone recording because this was a moment I wanted to capture forever, and I scanned the auditorium looking for my father, my stomach tight with anxiety about whether he'd actually show up or disappoint Skylar one more time. 5 minutes before the performance started, I'd almost given up hope when I saw him slip in through the back door, moving slowly because his heart attack had left him weaker than he used to be. He caught my eye and gave a small wave, and I felt relief flood through me because whatever else he'd done wrong, he was here now, keeping a promise that mattered. Skylar's turn came, and she walked onto that stage looking so small and brave, and when she lifted her violin and began to play, the song was simple because she was still learning, but it was beautiful because it was hers, because it represented everything she'd overcome, every breath that used to be a struggle, every dream she'd been told was too expensive, every bit of potential that had been locked away by poverty and lies. She finished, and the audience applauded, and when she took her bow and looked out into the crowd, her eyes found her grandfather first, and then found me, and the smile that broke across her face was pure joy. After the recital, my father approached slowly, and Skylar ran to him and hugged him, and he hugged her back with tears in his eyes. "You were wonderful, Skylar. I'm so proud of you," he said. And this time, the words sounded true because they were accompanied by action, by him actually showing up when it mattered. "I'm glad you came, Grandpa. It's better when you're here," Skylar said simply. My father looked at me over Skylar's head, and I saw gratitude and regret and hope all mixed together in his expression. "Thank you for letting me come," he said to me. "Thank you for showing up," I replied. And I meant it because showing up was everything, was the foundation that all the other repair work would have to be built on. We went out for ice cream after, the 3 of us, and we sat in a booth at a local shop and we talked and laughed. And it wasn't perfect because the past couldn't be erased, but it was real, and that was more important. My father told Skylar more stories from my childhood, and some of them were funny, and some of them were sad, but they were all true. And truth was the gift he was learning to give after a lifetime of withholding it. "Grandpa, why did you lie about the money for so long?" Skylar asked suddenly, with the bluntness that kids have when they want to understand something. I tensed, worried this would derail the fragile peace we'd built, but my father didn't get defensive or make excuses. "Because I was afraid, Skylar. My wife, your grandmother, who you never met, left me when your mom was little, and she said it was because I cared more about money than family. So I spent 20 years trying to prove I wasn't that person by pretending I didn't have money at all. But I was wrong, because lying to people you love hurts them more than any amount of money ever could," he explained, his voice steady and honest. Skylar considered this carefully, licking her ice cream cone. "That was silly, Grandpa. You should have just not been mean about money and not lied. Those are 2 different things," she said with the clarity of someone who hadn't learned to overcomplicate morality yet. My father laughed, actually laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in longer than I could remember. "You're absolutely right, Skylar. It was silly. I hope when you grow up, you're smarter about these things than I was," he said. "I will be. Mommy is teaching me to tell the truth even when it's hard, and to use money to help people, not to control them," Skylar said matter-of-factly, and I felt pride swell in my chest because whatever mistakes I'd made as a mother, somehow I was raising a kid who understood what mattered. The months passed, and slowly, carefully, we built something new that resembled a family. Not the family we'd been before. That version was gone forever, killed by secrets that couldn't be taken back, but a different family, one built on honesty and consequences and the difficult work of forgiveness. My father attended therapy, something I'd insisted on as a condition of continued contact with Skylar, and he started to unpack the trauma and fear that had driven his terrible decisions. He told me once, during one of our coffee meetings, that his therapist had diagnosed him with a control disorder stemming from abandonment issues, and that understanding the psychology behind his behavior didn't excuse it, but at least helped him see the pattern he needed to break. I'm trying to be better, Lauren. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm trying to build a different future, he said. I can see that, Dad, and I appreciate it. But you need to understand that trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy, and rebuilding it is even slower than building it the first time. You're going to have to be patient with me and with Skylar, I told him. I will be. I promise. And Lauren, thank you for not giving up on me completely. A lot of people would have, and you'd have been justified, he said. I shrugged. I didn't do it for you, I did it for Skylar, because she deserves to have a grandfather if he can be a good one, and I did it for me, because I needed to prove I could choose mercy over revenge and still maintain my boundaries. But Dad, if you mess this up again, if you lie or manipulate or try to control us with money or guilt or anything else, I'm done. There won't be another chance. Do you understand? I said firmly. He nodded, his expression serious. I understand, and I won't mess it up. I can't afford to lose you both again, he said. The charitable foundation we established began operating officially in the spring, and the first family we helped was a single mother named Diana, who had a son with severe asthma and no insurance. When I met her in person to tell her that her son's medication and treatment would be fully covered, she broke down, crying in a way that I recognized because I'd done the same thing so many times before we got lucky. Why are you doing this? You don't even know us, Diana asked through her tears. I knelt down beside her and took her hands. Because I was you. I know what it's like to watch your child struggle to breathe and not be able to afford the help they need. My daughter and I were drowning in poverty while my father sat on a fortune and hid it from us. And when that money finally came to light, I realized it was too much for just us. It needed to be shared with people who were living the nightmare we barely escaped, I explained. Diana looked at me like I was some kind of angel, but I wasn't. I was just someone who'd been given an undeserved miracle and was trying to turn it into something that made sense of all the suffering that came before it. Your son is going to be okay now. He's going to breathe easier, and you're going to breathe easier too, I promised her. Over the next year, we helped 23 families, and every single one of them sent thank you cards and photos and updates about their children's health improving. And I kept them all in a box that I showed to Skylar regularly so she could see what her fortune was doing in the world. Mommy, do you think Grandpa understands now why the money should be used like this? Skylar asked one evening while we were looking through the cards together. I think he's starting to. He's learning that money isn't something you hoard to protect yourself from the world. It's something you use to make the world better. It's a hard lesson for someone who spent decades thinking the opposite, but he's trying, I said. Skylar nodded thoughtfully. I'm glad he's trying. It's nicer having a grandpa who tries than one who pretends everything is fine when it's not, she said. By Skylar's 8th birthday, our life had transformed so completely that sometimes I had to remind myself it was real and not some elaborate dream I'd wake up from to find myself back in our old, cramped apartment with bills I couldn't pay. We threw Skylar a birthday party, not an extravagant one because I didn't want to teach her that love was measured in dollars spent, but a nice one, with her friends and decorations, and a cake that was actually good instead of the cheapest option from the grocery store. My father came to the party, and he brought a present that was thoughtful rather than expensive, a journal for Skylar to write her thoughts in because he'd learned that she liked to write stories. I thought you might like to have a place to put all those ideas in your head, he told her when she opened it. Skylar hugged him. Thank you, Grandpa, "This is perfect," she said, and I saw my father's eyes get misty because he was learning, finally learning, that the best gifts were the ones that showed you actually paid attention to who someone was rather than just trying to impress them with price tags. During the party, while the kids were playing in the backyard under the supervision of the parents I'd become friends with, parents who didn't know our whole complicated story and just accepted us as neighbors who'd done well for ourselves, my father pulled me aside. "Lauren, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious enough that I immediately tensed, worried that something was wrong. "What is it, Dad?" I asked. He took a breath. "I've been working with my lawyer and my accountant, and I want to sign over what's left of my portion of the Roe money to the foundation, all of it. After the restitution to Patricia and the legal fees and the fines, there's about $42 million left, and I want it to go toward helping families like the ones you're already helping. I don't need it, I never really did, and I think it's time for it to do something good instead of just sitting there reminding me of my mistakes," he said. I stared at him in shock. "Dad, that's your retirement, your security, your entire future. Are you sure?" I asked, because even after everything, I didn't want him to end up destitute in his old age. He smiled, and it was a real smile, peaceful in a way I'd never seen him before. "I'm 68 years old, Lauren. I have my Social Security. I have a small pension from the company, and I have enough in savings to live simply for the rest of my life. What I don't have is the ability to go back and make different choices 20 years ago. But I can make different choices now. I can choose to let that money do what it should have been doing all along, helping people who need it. Let me do this. Let me turn the worst thing I ever did into something that might balance the scales a little bit," he pleaded. I thought about it, about whether this was genuine change or just another form of manipulation, another way for him to try to control the narrative. But when I looked in his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen there before. Genuine peace with consequences, genuine desire to do right without expecting praise or redemption in return. "Okay, Dad. If this is really what you want, we'll make it happen. The foundation will carry your name alongside Skylar's so people know you chose to do this," I said. He shook his head. "No, just Skylar's name. This isn't about me rehabilitating my reputation. This is about doing what I should have done decades ago without needing credit for it," he insisted. And right then, I realized my father had finally learned the lesson it took him almost 70 years to understand. That real change happens quietly, without an audience, without expectation of reward, just because it's the right thing to do and you're finally brave enough to do it. The donation was processed. The foundation's capacity expanded dramatically, and we were able to help not 23 families, but hundreds of families across Massachusetts and eventually across the country. Skylar, even though she was only 8 years old, became the face of the foundation in a limited way, doing occasional interviews with her wisdom beyond her years about why helping others mattered. I was poor, and then I wasn't, but a lot of kids are still poor. And that's not fair. If I can help make it a little more fair, then I want to do that, she said in one interview. And the clip went viral because people were hungry for stories about goodness and generosity in a world that seemed increasingly dark and selfish. My father watched that interview from his modest apartment, the small place he'd moved into after selling his house and donating the proceeds to the foundation, and he called me crying. "I don't deserve her, Lauren. She's so much better than I ever was," he said through his tears. "No, Dad, you don't deserve her. But none of us really deserve the grace we're given. We just have to be grateful for it and try to become people who might deserve it someday," I told him gently. Years passed, and the story of Frank Mitchell's betrayal and Lauren Mitchell's mercy became one of those local legends that people told when they wanted to illustrate complicated truths about family and forgiveness and the ways money can reveal who people really are. Skylar grew up grounded and generous, studying hard, helping others, remembering where she came from while building toward where she wanted to go. She decided she wanted to be a doctor, specifically a pediatric pulmonologist, so she could help kids like herself who struggled to breathe. My father lived to see her graduate high school with honors, and at her graduation party, he stood up and gave a speech that made everyone cry. When I was younger, I thought protecting the people I loved meant controlling everything around them, including information they deserved to have. I was wrong, and that wrongness cost me and my family years of pain that could have been avoided if I'd just been brave enough to trust them with the truth. My granddaughter Skylar is graduating today, and she's going off to college fully funded, fully healthy, fully prepared to make a difference in the world. And none of that would have been possible if my daughter Lauren hadn't been strong enough to fight for what was right, even when it meant fighting against me. Lauren taught me that real love isn't about control. It's about showing up honestly, even when the truth is ugly, even when you've made terrible mistakes, even when you don't deserve another chance. Skylar, I'm so proud of the young woman you've become, and I'm grateful every day that your mother gave me the opportunity to know you, really know you, without the lies I used to hide behind. You're going to do amazing things, and I'm lucky I get to watch, he said, his voice strong despite his age and his failing heart that had required 2 more surgeries over the years. Skylar hugged him, this girl who'd been denied so much in her early years, but had somehow emerged full of compassion rather than bitterness. And she whispered something in his ear that I couldn't hear, but that made him smile through his tears. Later, when I asked her what she'd said, she told me simply, "I said thank you for showing up, Grandpa. Better late than never." And that summed up our whole complicated journey better than any speech or story could. Better late than never. Better to change even when it's hard than to stay stubborn in your mistakes. Better to choose truth even when lies are more comfortable. Better to forgive even when anger feels justified. My father passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, at 71 years old, and at his funeral the chapel was filled with people whose lives had been changed by the foundation he'd ultimately funded. Families who existed in comfort instead of desperation, because of money he'd finally learned to let go of. I gave the eulogy, and I told the truth, all of it, because that's what he would have wanted at the end, the truth without polish or protection. My father was a complicated man who made terrible choices that hurt people he loved, and he spent the last years of his life trying to make amends for those choices. He didn't fully succeed because some damage can't be completely repaired, but he tried harder than most people would have, and that effort mattered. He taught me, unintentionally, that you can love someone and still hold them accountable, that you can forgive someone without forgetting what they did. And that change is possible at any age if you're brave enough to face who you've been and decide to become someone better. Dad, I hope wherever you are now, you're at peace. I hope you finally believe that you were loved not because of your money or despite your mistakes, but because you were my father and because even when it was hard, I chose to keep loving you. Rest easy. You finally did the right thing, and that's enough, I said. And I meant every word. Skylar, now 18 and headed to college in the fall, squeezed my hand as we sat in the front row after the service, and she leaned her head on my shoulder the way she used to when she was little. "Do you think he knew he was forgiven?" she asked quietly. I thought about that question carefully, about all the conversations we'd had, all the moments of progress and setbacks, all the times my father had asked if I could ever really forgive him, and I'd given him honest answers that weren't always what he wanted to hear. I think he knew he was forgiven as much as he could be, while still being held accountable. I think he knew I loved him even though I wouldn't let him off the hook for what he'd done. And I think that's actually more meaningful than blanket forgiveness would have been, because it was real, I told her. Skylar nodded. I'm glad we gave him a chance to be better. Not because he deserved it, but because we did. We deserved to see if people can really change, she said with the wisdom that had always made her seem older than her years. And she was right. The miracle of our story wasn't. The money that appeared like magic in a bank account Wasn't the fortune that transformed our material circumstances. Wasn't the wealth that let Skylar grow up comfortable and healthy and full of opportunities. The real miracle was that we chose mercy when revenge would have been easier, chose honesty when lies would have been simpler, chose to believe in the possibility of change when giving up would have been justified. The real miracle was Skylar herself, this remarkable young woman who'd been shaped by poverty but not broken by it, who'd been given wealth but not corrupted by it, who'd witnessed betrayal but hadn't become cynical, who'd learned that love was complicated and messy and sometimes painful but still worth choosing every single day. As we left the cemetery that afternoon, walking toward our car with the sun setting behind us casting everything in gold light, Skylar turned to me and asked, "Mom, do you think the story has a happy ending?" I considered that question, thought about everything we'd been through, all the pain and healing and complicated progress. I think it has an honest ending, which is better than happy. We survived something that could have destroyed us. We turned suffering into purpose. We learned that people are capable of both terrible mistakes and genuine change. And we're okay, sweetheart. We're more than okay. We're free from the lies that held us prisoner, and that's the happiest ending I could have hoped for, I told her. Skylar smiled, that beautiful smile that had gotten us through the darkest days. "Yeah, I think so too. And Mom, thank you for fighting for us, for fighting for the truth even when it was hard. I know I was little during most of it, but I remember, and I'm grateful," she said. I pulled her close as we walked, this daughter who'd taught me more about grace and resilience than any book or philosophy ever could. "You're welcome, baby. But thank you for being exactly who you are, for being the reason the fight was worth it, for being the miracle that made all the other miracles make sense," I said. And as we drove away from the cemetery, leaving behind the man who'd caused so much pain and ultimately so much growth, heading toward whatever future we would build together with honesty and love and the fortune that had finally found its purpose, I realized that some stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with honestly ever after. And sometimes that's the best ending of all. The money would continue doing good work through the foundation. Families would continue being helped. Children would continue breathing easier. Single mothers would continue getting the support they needed to survive and thrive. Skylar would go to college and then medical school and eventually become the doctor she dreamed of being, using her wealth not as a crutch but as a tool to help others. And I would continue living a life built on truth rather than lies, on earned trust rather than demanded loyalty, on love that was freely given and carefully maintained rather than taken for granted and carelessly destroyed. My father's $312 million lie had nearly destroyed us, but in the end it taught us what mattered. Not the money itself, but what you chose to do with it. Not the betrayal itself, but how you chose to heal from it. Not the mistakes themselves, but whether you were brave enough to admit them and do better. We were finished with the old life, just like my father had said that day in the hospital. But we weren't destroyed. We were rebuilt, stronger and truer and more whole than we'd ever been when we were held together by lies. And that rebuilding, that choice to construct something honest from the rubble of deception, that was the real fortune we'd inherited, worth more than any amount of money could ever buy. Skylar Mitchell's name would appear on buildings and scholarships and foundations for decades to come. A reminder that wealth carries responsibility, that suffering can be transformed into purpose, and that children who are taught to value truth and compassion will change the world in ways their grandparents could never imagine. And somewhere, I hoped, my father's restless spirit had finally found peace, knowing that the worst thing he'd ever done had been redeemed by the best thing his daughter and granddaughter chose to become. living proof that even the deepest betrayals can't destroy love if you're willing to fight for it, forgive it, and transform it into something that helps others find their way home.